So let's start with a small definition here. What is an interface? An interface is to connect scientific equipment with or to, so as to make possible joint operation. I found this surprisingly well-fitting definition at the Oxford English Dictionary, and I think it applies quite well for the marketplace. You may even see the marketplace as one interface itself, because it connects researchers on the one hand to research-related resources on the other hand. But during my talk, we will get a bit more into the details, and you see already the three interface dimensions I want to talk about. I hope that you can relate to the examples I've put here on the slides. If you have other examples or even an idea for a completely new dimension, I would love to hear from you. So, but before we start with the interfaces, a very, very short summary what the SSH Open Marketplace is in a nutshell. It's a discovery platform for resources like tools, tutorials, data sets, or workflow, which can be used in the social sciences and the humanities. I will leave it here because I assume that most of you in the audience are hopefully familiar with the SSH Open Marketplace already, and I want just to make two small remarks here. The first one is related to the content of the marketplace. So it's important for you to keep in mind that the content you see in the marketplace is not owned by the SSH Open Marketplace, but usually comes from third parties. So with this come some limitations and specialties you will notice later on in the talk. The second remark I want to make is regarding the curation of the content. Currently, the important or most important method is the automatic harvesting of third-party sources to initially populate the marketplace. And hopefully in the future, the second method to curate the content will be the community-induced curation. So by the stakeholders and users of the service. And if you are interested in taking part in this effort, we would like to invite you and welcome in our curation team. So if you are interested, just get in touch with us. So let's now start with the human interface dimension. When I talk about the human interface dimension, I talk basically about the graphical user interface of the marketplace. Why is it important? Why is the GUI important? Because it has to handle all interaction of the human user with the service. So two main tasks are to be fulfilled here. The first one, the GUI should deliver fitting search results to the individual user. But on the other hand, it has to demonstrate all the functionalities available from the service. And it has to do in a very smart and convenient way. The means we applied in the SHOC development team to achieve a good quality for the user interface are human-centered design principles, participatory design, responsivity, etc. I won't explain them here right now, but I'd like to take the opportunity to highlight the work of one of our partners. That's the Poznan Supercomputing and Networking Center. They did a lot of work on the GUI, and I think they did a very good job with it. So, what are the main challenges related to this interface dimension? I think my main challenge I see is that the graphical user interface is not a standalone function, but it comes with substantial dependencies to the data below. So you may think of the data model here, the heterogeneity of the data you harvest, even the data formats that are displayed in the marketplace. So these are restraints for the implementation of innovative functions, because on the one hand, you want to keep it as simple as possible, but on the other hand, you would like to have interesting functionalities, and that's a bit of a trade-off. So just short, you can look up, it's on your own, but here's a screenshot how the interface looks like. It's the language resource switchboard from our friendly colleagues of Clarin. And here you have a detail page of how the relations could look like in the end. So you have the Voyant text tools here and related data sets, tools, or training materials. So after the human interface, dimension, we quickly go over to the machine readable interface dimension. And interface in this regard is the REST API, which allows for machine-to-machine interaction. And why it is important? Because other than with a graphical user interface, only one user at a time, the machine readable interface has the potential to scale up the use of your data. So you might think of use cases such as mass ingest of new content, either by you or by other parties, or you might think of use cases related to research. One could analyze and visualize the content of the marketplace, or you may even think of use cases related to value-added services. And during Shock, we tried this out with Switchboard and the virtual collection registry to think about useful relations between the tools, so the marketplace and the Switchboard. The challenges in this regard I see are that, is that many good ideas you might have stand and fall with the quality of the available data or the protocols you can use for it. So there are the limitations in implementing nice use cases. I won't go into the details here, but you may look them up after my presentation. If you have questions to the technical details of the REST API, I think Matej would be most happy to answer your questions. I'd only like to make this remark here that already today, the marketplace content is through the API available for experiments. So if you are interested in using the REST API, you're welcome. You may already look up one exciting example. If you follow the first link here, then you end up in the left bottom corner where a screenshot is visible. That's a screenshot from a Jupyter notebook by our colleague Cesare Concordia, who analyzes and visualizes the marketplace content. So this is one experiment applying the API. If you are interested, click the other three links on my slide here to get through the API to the documentation or in touch with the team. So the third and last dimension I want to talk about to you, the social interface or interfaces. Interface in this regard is basically represented by relations to other communities, entities, or organizations. And this dimension is important because the social relations translate into reputation, trust, and awareness, for instance, by your end users. And the main means to facilitate this are to invest time in networking and communicating. In our case, many of these activities have been targeted at the other ERICs or at the EOS context to establish stable relations. The challenges related to this interface have to do with the communication. Communication is time and people. So you need both of these resources, not only time, but also suitable people who are competent or come with the expertise to talk about the things and come with the authority to decide on possible ideas. You may think of the switchboard example earlier on. If you want to implement a functionality with a switchboard, you need to have the access to the developers of the service. So this is the challenge related to social interface. A bit simpler here is this very simplified screenshot of the governance structure of the marketplace. The four bubbles you see on this slide are basically interfaces connecting to stakeholders of the service. I don't want to explain each one of them, but just draw your attention to the users and curators bubble, because this relates back to the community-induced curation I talked earlier on. If you are interested in taking part in our curation effort, you may get in touch with us, and then you are an example for functioning interface. So these were the three interfaces. I come to the end of my talk, but one important slide is left. it would be strange to have a talk about the SSH Open Marketplace at the DARIAH annual event without even mentioning specific DARIAH sources. So I will make it now. If you tried out the service already a bit, you may encounter the sources list. I have marked it here in orange, and you may have recognized that no specific DARIAH source appears there. Calm down, I will explain it to you in a second. First remark, some DARIAH resources may or are already in the marketplace, for instance, TextGrid Laboratory, but they are harvested through other sources like Tapor or the Programming Historian. What is already scheduled until the final release of the marketplace, the end of this year, are the DARIAH Campus resources and the DARIAH in-kinds. So these main DARIAH sources will appear in the marketplace until the end of this year, and I hope this answer satisfies you a bit. So this is the end of my presentation. I'd like to thank Laure and Ed for helping me out in preparing the slide deck. I would like to hand over for questions to Matej and Ed. And yeah, I thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, Stefan. Questions, actually, we would defer to the end of the session. Yeah, and yes, there will be other people have to answer them because Stefan need to lead the session.
Goodbye and have a good session, everyone.
Thank you very much again. Okay, so let's move on to the next one, and that would be Femmy Admiraal and Andrea Scharnhorst and their colleagues presenting the Polyfonia portal, and it will be Andrea presenting. Andrea, the floor is yours.
So I bring to you a presentation about a project from musicology, which is called Polyfonia, and you see the authors listed there, of which I think Femmy is also present. And that's another take on interfaces. That's actually the Polyfonia portal itself, which is an envisioned, a planned thing. That's an interface, but I would like to talk to you about the interfacing kind of steps we do towards building the portal. And now I need to see how I can go to the next slide. Yeah. So I will tell a bit about the project, the visions on the portal, the stakeholders, and then basically also show you some steps we have taken in between. Polyfonia is a Horizon 2020 project. It has 10 consortium partners. You see the details here, you know these kind of slides. So it is semi-middle concerning the size of the budget. And it is quite complex. And this is what you see here. Polyfonia is built from pilots, and its focus is to give better access to musical heritage. And the red line through it is to do this via linked data technology, so semantic web technology, basically. So the knowledge engineers are the engine in the project. But the pilots themselves unfold the breadth of the project. And you might not be able to read all the text, but you will notice that they have different color codes, and you probably also see the headings. So we have pilot projects or sub-projects which are about preserving musical heritage, which actually aim to enhance the description of their source material. And one of them, bells, is about towers, bell towers in the northern of Italy. So they also have an element of archaeology in them. And then we have pilots like Tunes here, which uses a database where actually sound and score of Dutch folk songs is stored to look into the music. So this is about the width of the project from the structures which make music, from architecture structures over instruments to actually to the music itself. Let me see. Sorry, I have a bit of a problem here with next slide kind of things. Here I found it. Accordingly, there are different visions on what the Polyfonia portal should look like. So there are elements of a registry which you could compare with an old-fashioned card catalog or an annotated bibliography. There are dreams of having a machine-readable aggregator, very much using already existing linked data-based catalogs of musical data on the web. But there are also ideas of having demonstrators woven into the portal, and demonstrators both for researchers as also for those who enjoy music. So there is a really kind of wide aspiration of what the portal should be. Now, who's the stakeholder of all of that? First of all, it's inside of the consortium. There's a lot of negotiation going on. Then there is an area around the consortium of cultural heritage institutions, some of them already committed to do the sustainable hosting of results after the project ended. And then, of course, there is this wide range, wider public societal impact the project also has. In the making of the portal, we found ourselves in the midst of a variety of different, at the beginning also partly competing efforts to actually gather together the relevant information and to find a language, a shared language to define tables in which we could exchange them, formats, sheets, visualizations. So what has been applied from the group who is responsible for the design of the portal is to do multiple surveys with the pilot leaders to ask for the sources, but also for the epistemic framework. So what is on your mind? What is the research question you wanted to answer? And as we have very different stakeholders, archivists on the one side, researchers on the others, then engineers, then people working with public audiences of music, you can also imagine that this kind of epistemic variety, the goals and the research questions vary. This has led to what we have called a bit ambitious, the atlas of sources, which are network visualization, and I show you an example in a minute. And in parallel, the group came together and developed archetypical personas and stories, what kind of quest for information those personas would probably go onto. And then Manipasta kind of workshops were organized around that to give that more shape as another kind of glue among the different pilots. And then, of course, what all of you familiar with semantic web will recognize is a collection of existing ontologies and competency questions. So those questions you might be able to answer if you would have all the information machine readable and linked with each other. And last but not least, there's also research data management planning to be done on the project. Interestingly, all of that has been already envisioned as being iterative, as kind of being executed iterative, and still we were struggling in aligning the different kind of questionnaires to the participants. And in particular, we also found that research data management, although it's usually seen as a rather dry kind of documentary exercise, can be quite helpful to help to focus in the project. Now, I spoke about the atlas, and it's probably hard to understand why people found that so exciting. If you just look at it with an outside view, you think, okay, I probably recognize those are the pilots, yeah, the blue ones are the pilots, and then those are the types of data used. But I think it was extremely helpful for the consortium to see which types of data are shared, even not if the data themselves, but at least the type of data shared among the different pilots, and also what variety of data formats we are actually handling. That's, of course, in particular important for the research data management. Even more exciting is the ordering Christoph tried to do on the kind of research question or epistemological frameworks or knowledge units. He finally labeled that. So you have some pilots which are about melodic patterns, so facets and tunes and interlinks share that. And then you have tonality, which is even on a more fine-grained kind of level of musicological questions, dealing with questions for tonality modulation, harmonic vectors, cadences, scales, and how that appears in different pieces of music through time and places. And then you have also quite some pilots which deal more with the bibliographic kind of level. So the metadata to describe the actually data sets, what should be the elements, the composers, where pieces were actually presented to a wider public, and so on and so on. We also used quite mundane tables and color coding, and we tried to align them across the information needed for the design of the portal, the information needed for the research data management plan, and the information needed to bring all the ontologies together. And this one just lists the stories and the personatas and which pilot is connected to them, and they all live happily in GitHub, in a GitHub repository. The point I wanted to make here is that in complex, large-scale interdisciplinary project, the inside knowledge management is something we do take care, but we use to kind of put it under the actually research goal we are going to follow. And that can lead also to a lot of tensions. I think we heard people talking about it also yesterday, when they reported that they had a lot of communication, all these communicative hurdles to overcome. And sometimes I wish we had a textbook or a good organized blog entry somewhere, which gives us a check-up list what to do before to start and go into such a complex project. The experience from Polyfonia so far, being 9 months now into the project, is that we also changed the methods according to the course of interaction. And I think it's very important to make explicit and to reflect about the different shapes or the different kind of perspectives, which also come with a flavor and a genre and a style of writing. So if you talk about the research data management plan, that clearly comes from a documentary bibliographic perspective, while the ontology-based knowledge graph kind of question have another background. And yet again, the the socio-technical roadmap towards the portal has to negotiate between all those different perspectives. And I think in the communication, to make explicit what your background is, what your actually intention is, what you wanted to, what your epistemic framework of thinking is extremely valuable and can be improved. I think there's still room for improvement.
Andrea, you have like 2 minutes or so. Would you?
Yeah, okay, I'm wrapping up. So what I wanted to bring to you in this kind of fly through the project is that the making of the portal is interwoven with the organization of the knowledge exchange inside of the project. So the processes during the project and its outcome are not decoupled, and it's also not so that only the processes count which lead to the portal. It's much more messy. Yeah. What we see in the case of Polyfonia is that we apply a lot of qualitative methods, not to ask the future users that you often see in infrastructural project, but more to ask the consortium members. So to get an alignment of thinking and to build this shared space of understanding among the consortium members. And then iteration, so being purposefully about iterations is also, I think, quite a key element and also a good one. But there are challenges in the alignment of what is the bottom-up, what is the kind of envisioned way, and the actually now concrete work on very concrete questions, as it always is. And then we find that visualizations, but also mundane things like tabular tables, color-coded tables, work beautifully, archetypal stories, personatas, visualizations of pipelines and workflows. All those are elements of a translatory work, as it is called in STS, in science technology studies. And they act as interfaces or as boundary objects, as a technical term for that also is, towards the final interface. So what I would like to invite you to is also to let us know by using our emails, which you all have when you look into the slides and the abstracts, to let us know about your experience, similar, comparable, others. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Andrea. I would like to move to the next presentation, Designing for Discovery. Paula Forbes from Abertay University and her colleagues. Yeah, Paula will present. The floor is yours.
So thanks for having me along today. I'm here on behalf of my other triple colleagues to present to you one section of the work that we've been doing to develop a discovery interface, namely the GoTriple platform, which is part of the Triple project. So for this, we've been really trying to understand what social science and humanities users do to kind of in their discovery practices and understand the methods that they've used. So to do this, we've been taking various approaches, and this work has really led on from some early interviews and persona development that we did. But for this section of work, we've taken a sort of dual approach and used two different methods, and I'm going to explain these to you just now. Okay, so the Triple project began in October 2019. It's a 42-month project, so we're just gone past the halfway stage, and we're about to release a beta version of the platform. But I have a really kind of short 2-minute video that I'm keen to share with you, if I can find it just a second. Okay, right, so hopefully this will be a work.
As a researcher in the social sciences and humanities, you hope your work can someday make a small difference in society. And you know that bridges across disciplines, languages, and cultures are often the key to discovering solutions for societal challenges. But finding the research you need can be frustrating because disciplines are highly fragmented, because research outputs can't be accessed, and because of language barriers. What if we could break down the silos? If we could encourage interdisciplinarity, make access to research easier, and strengthen multilingual and multicultural diversity? So that researchers across disciplines can find each other and advance their research through collaborations. And through just a single platform, find open access publications, data sets, researcher profiles, and projects from multiple repositories as well as traditional journals. What if we could break down the silos and cultural to advance their a single platform, find open access publications, data sets, researcher profiles, and projects from multiple repositories as well as traditional journals. And a search term in one language, used specifically in one research area, produces results in multiple languages and disciplines. The GoTriple Discovery Platform aims to do this, to take your research to the next level, for research that serves society. With innovative visual search features that pull from 9 languages and multiple journals and open access repositories, you can easily get an overview of a new topic or dive deep into your research area. Through its trust-building system, you're just a virtual handshake away from finding the resources you need by posting a request within your trusted network, leading to evidence-based services for society, impactful journalism, effective policymaking, and the free use and reuse of knowledge for everyone. Sign on now and join the community of GoTriple beta testers.
Okay, sorry about what happened in the middle of that, but hopefully you got the gist. Okay. So yeah, that's a short video that myself and Eliza, along with a couple from DARIAH, along with a couple of our colleagues, have been working on. So if anybody has feedback on that, it's not actually been released, and I'd be grateful for anybody to drop me a line at the end to say if it kind of communicates what we're trying to do, or if it's a bit over the top, or anything in between. Be grateful for your comments. Okay, so moving on. This is just a slide, just kind of trying to convey where Triple sits within the kind of other community of different platforms and services that you'll all be familiar with. Okay. But for the work that we've done, so what we were really trying to achieve is to try and better understand the kind of workflows of social science and humanities researchers. And because it's so complex, we found out in our early interviews that the process was very complex, including a multitude of tools. We really wanted to understand the different workflows and to see how the different disciplines use the tools to make discoveries. And this kind of work will hopefully help us to make sure that the GoTriple platform meets the needs of the end users involved. Okay, so the two different methods that we used, one was to actually watch and record what the research was doing online, and you'll all be familiar with this. It's a kind of cognitive walkthrough technique. It's a kind of widely used usability method. So we took this approach of watching and trying to understand. And the second one was a newer process, and we took, which was really taken from a technique used by Bodker et al., and it was about artifact ecology mapping. So it's to get them to map the journeys. So the walkthrough method, we did 6, and my colleague from DARIAH actually undertook this work for us. And they did 6 different researchers, and the sessions took about 30 to 40 minutes. They had a script for talking the user through the process, but it was left up to them. It was just we were wanting to capture their normal working method and how they made research, how they would search for things, what they would do, that kind of thing. So saving, interacting with the people possibly, but really doing the gist of it was searching for material. Okay, and after they produced the recordings, they went back and reflected on the kind of videos and produced a map of the tools used. And this was so that we could then compare with the second approach that we'd been taking, which was the actual artifact mapping. So this just gives you an example, and you can see it does kind of highlight some of the pain points along the way. Another map here, for example, coming across the kind of open access issues that we're all familiar with, or coming across paywalls, that kind of thing. So, but the second method that we used was, as I mentioned, it was adapted from an original paper by Bodker et al. And they were using interviews and then this paper-based sticker technique. So they'd actually had the physical paper stickers, and they were working with researchers using the stickers to get them to map the different tools that they were using. And this had been done across a volunteer community. So we adapted this method to be able to go online. We'd initially envisaged that we would maybe do some physical workshops, but because of the pandemic, we had to modify this, and we changed it to be able to do it online. So we actually found that the tool Miro was really useful for us, which is an online whiteboarding tool. So we used a combination of Teams and then Miro to do the workshops, and this worked quite well. So we ran, I think it was 11 different sessions, I think. So one was a group session, but we found that didn't really work so well. So the focus was then on just more individuals working with one individual researcher at a time. And this was the kind of a quick go through of the instructions that we did. So we set up the Miro board ahead of time, send the participant a link to a Teams meeting along with any informed consent form, making them aware that we'll be recording the sessions. And then at the time of the participant joining the Teams meeting, we'd share the link to our Miro board, and then have to kind of do a quick onboarding process with the participants to get them to use Miro. And at the end of the session, we were able to do a quick transcription process using MS Streams. It was automated transcription that gave us a quick overview of the conversation that had taken place. So this is just a quick screenshot of our sticker board. So we used using the digital whiteboarding tool, we created this board of different tools that we thought that SSH researchers might be using. It tended to evolve as we did more researches because they would introduce us to new things that perhaps we weren't aware of at the beginning. But we had the post-it notes there so that if they used something we weren't familiar with, then they could still add this in. So you can see on the right-hand side, it's just an example map of one that I created so that we knew we could convey what we were looking for them to do in this session. Okay, so this is just a screenshot of the Miro board that we used. So we had a quick overview of what the Triple project was trying to achieve. And then we had a practice board we did for the onboarding at the beginning to get the researchers familiar with the actions on Miro. But we did find it was really quite intuitive and it didn't take too long to get the hang of using it. Again, that was the example was given to them so they knew what they were doing. And then we would just talk them through the different processes that they would use. So we would chat to them as they were putting things on the map. Okay. So this is just a bit of a closer up view of one of the maps that were produced. So you can see here, participant 6. And you can see it was quite nice in capturing the kind of vast, amount of different tools that researchers are using and of some of the various pain points along the way. So for example, I think this researcher was saying it was actually quite difficult maybe to make complex searches in one of the platforms. They found that the notifications they were getting from ResearchGate weren't particularly helpful. Another one, and the same participant had actually deleted their account from academia because of the overload of information they were getting from this platform. So this was kind of quite a rich overview, we felt, of the things that were going on during this discovery process. Okay. So from this and the maps, and after a kind of period of reflection, we had a few different boards. I went back over them and did a regrouping, a sort of remapping activity. And this was also done in the Bodka paper as well. They did this remapping. And this is really based on the kind of different themes or different activities that were taking place. So you can see that the kind of blue box is the actual searching. The bottom right-hand side was actually searching a bit more for people rather than academic publications. So they had slightly different methods for finding other researchers than they did for papers, for example. The pinky box on the left-hand side was showing what people would do on a different device. So if on a mobile phone or a tablet and journeys made, so that maybe on their way to work or something like that, they might do some discovery processes then. And the other ones were just looked at archiving, what they were doing and sharing and collaboration, and the recommendations as well.
Paula, you have like 1 to 2 minutes. Does it work for you, or do you need more?
About there. This is my last slide. So yeah, we're just going to summarize the two methods really. So we found that the methods were actually quite complementary, but they did tend to work slightly, better. They had pros and cons, I think, each one of them. So the cognitive walkthrough, we found it didn't rely on the researcher's memory. So they're actually doing the process there and then. So it's not having to rely on the recall of the activity. And for that reason, we think that the artifact ecology mapping is really only useful for things that the researcher is very familiar with. And we think that this is obviously one of those activities we all do searching quite a lot. And this kind of activity is in our mind. So we are familiar with it and it worked quite well. But the cognitive walkthrough might be better if you were going to be trying to assess something that the researcher maybe didn't do very often. The cognitive walkthrough focus was really on a single device, whereas the artifact ecology mapping was able to take into account several devices, and it resulted in a much more sort of divergent and complex workflow than the kind of cognitive walkthrough did. The cognitive walkthrough gives an accurate portrayal of the journey, and we believe that the artifact ecology mapping also does, but obviously it's, we're not as sure about that as we are about the cognitive walkthrough. But the benefit, we think, of the artifact ecology mapping is that it's really able to take into account a much longer term interaction of the researcher with the tools that they use. The focus of the walkthrough is on a time constrained interaction. So it's just on what you're doing at that time and with the kind of software during the set period. whereas the artifact ecology mapping is able to take into account these different longer-term interactions and what we call like the in-between interactions. So perhaps things that the researcher themselves isn't doing, but things are happening in between. So for example, receiving these push notifications from different platforms, and perhaps collaborative work with different people taking place, you know, different researchers maybe adding to and contributing to this kind of collaborative working process. So different tools for kind of different techniques, but we think that they were actually quite complementary for us to get a better understanding of the kind of research process that is involved here. Okay, so that's me. If anybody does have any feedback on our short video, then please let me know. Either there's a Google Doc here, or you can just ping me an email. But thanks very much. Happy to answer any questions at the end.
Thank you very much, Paula. And you indeed already got quite a few positive feedback in the chat. Given the time, we have to move on now. And that will be the last presentation from Georgia Panagiotidou, sorry,
Yes.
And her colleagues. The floor is yours.
So, hi everyone. I'm Andrea Panagiotidou. I'm presenting on behalf of our colleagues, as you can see, my colleagues you can see on the screen. I'm going to present a much smaller scale project than the ones have been discussed so far. So this is actually, it's related to my own PhD work, and which I'm doing in KU Leuven, which is in Belgium. And it's interdisciplinary between research X design, so it's like human-computer interaction research, and the Sagalassos archaeological research project. And specifically, I will talk about a visualization that is of archaeological site data that kind of includes some uncertainty into it, and how we try to kind of, in my work and my research, I try to communicate that in the visualization itself. So I'm going to talk, 1 second, see if it, okay, yeah. So I'm going to introduce a little bit the archaeological research project, the specific data set we're actually talking about, the interface that we created, the visualization, its design and development, and the general features and the ones that are inherent to data uncertainties, and end with some reflections. So this is more of a bottom-up view of an interface. Sagalassos is an archaeological city and a site located in southwest Turkey, and it has evidence from occupation already from the late Achaemenid period, so late 5th century, but it's during the Roman imperial time that actually it has reached its heyday, and it grew into a regional center. So during that time, it was actually a full territory of around 1,200 square kilometers, and it's this kind of scale of data that I'm going to be presenting in this work. So the Sagalassos Archaeological Research Project has been conducting field work in this region for over 30 years, and it's not limited to only excavations, but it includes also collecting environmental data by doing archaeological surface surveys, in the study area as well. Surface survey, I'm giving it some context to understand where the data is coming from, right? So the surface surveys are primary source of archaeological research data, and they are conducted by a team of archaeologists that explore the landscape on the ground to collect survey materials. And from that, they try to reconstruct past human activities within a certain area to identify sites of human activity, recording their chronology, their nature, and their size. So it's the visualization of this specific survey data that we'll be talking about today. They use two types of survey. We're talking about extensive and intensive, which differ from each other in terms of resolution and coverage, which brought a level of uncertainty, which we try to account for. Currently, this data, as is common in archaeology, is presented in GIS maps, similar to the ones you see here. So each of these, they create a kind of distribution maps, one for each period, that are then viewed together, but as maps like this to see to gain patterns of how activity of humans have been in the past. And this data set has several components. So spatial, like where it's located. It has functional components. So functional components include what kind of settlement type it might have been. Was it a town? Was it a hamlet or a farm? As well as whether there were some architectural fragments found there. A chronological component, which is the estimated dating for the site. So was it active during Roman Imperial, Hellenistic, and so on, as well as other metadata, including the site codes, the years of collection, and the collection methods, among others. As I mentioned, this is mostly analyzed to look at patterns over time of these settlements in terms using GIS, and with this kind of approach that is often called like dots on a map. So you have these kind of maps with various dots that are also critiqued because you kind of lose the temporal aspects of how these sites kind of relate to one another. And this is where we coming from human-computer interaction and visualization studies to kind of make a different presentation, a different interface to understand this data. So we have 3 main requirements, which is to explore both the temporal and spatial dimensions separately and in combination, to support a close and distant reading of the sites, and also take into account and exemplify data issues rather than just ignore them. The site, the presentation, the visualization is called SiteVis. It's based on, it's web-based, based on D3GS, and the input currently is with CSV, but we are planning on making it into a database API as well. It has 3 main components, so the spatial, the detail, and the temporal, and it's the temporal view in which I want to focus on, because this is actually the newest part that kind of where we have taken each of these sites and translated it into a signal of sorts, no, that oscillates through time, depending on the existence of not on the site in a period. So I will explain this a little bit here. So here on each line, you see a location that has been surveyed. And then the x-axis is actually the different time periods that have been existing or non-existing the sites. On this kind of representation, this kind of interface to this data gave a new kind of perspective to understand continuity, for instance, of these sites over time. And you can immediately see here, I'm not sure if you can see my mouse, you can see like clusters appearing of these sites. So I'm going to be playing these little videos on the background. The good thing is, or one thing we tried to include as well, building from other work on the digital humanities, is kind of allowing for this kind of distant reading also of this data, as well as the in-depth. And you can see here the functionality of sorting them in different ways. The third parameter that we said that we were the requirement was to try to account for data uncertainties. I'm not going to go into the reasons why. It might be pretty obvious for this audience why we should better understand data uncertainties, but I leave this here for somebody else if they want to look into depth. We found 3 types of uncertainty we wanted to represent. So the first thing is that the time prints, actually, the way we had represented the sites implied some sort of continuity, which is not necessarily the case. To clarify, just because the site was found that it might have listed during Hellenistic times, it doesn't mean that it was continuously appearing during that time, right? It might have disappeared along the way. So we tried to kind of separate the data interpretation views into continuous or more discrete values, right? So you can see now here the discrete version versus the continuous line versions of the sites from before. The second level of uncertainty we wanted to address was about interpretation. So the data we are looking at here is actually interpreted from the sites that have been found into settlements. The difference is that there was some kind of theoretical model, right, in order to say based on what are they a hamlet or a town. So in this case, it was based on this how big the distribution of the artifacts was, and some elements, additional elements. So we also added this kind of color coding, as you can see here, to indicate this kind of level of complexity, which also allowed to argue and reason based on these levels. Thirdly, we have the differing data methods, which is actually metadata in this case, which we added because, as I mentioned, there are different types of surveys or the way that these methods were collected. So we added these as a background in, I'm not sure, wait, the video is the wrong one, okay. But we added these as background. Yes, here you can see to each location, and then you can actually use the metadata as part of the reasoning process for getting insights. So rather than just leave them as a side thought into a text file, for instance, of metadata. So we include them directly. Some short conclusions: what worked, what is still missing. So okay, it did actually manage to address some of the uncertainties that the data had implicitly already included into it. So when sense making with this, many insights came out, and a lot of them also were related, for instance, to the methods itself. So in that sense, it worked well. Some other aspects were not working too well. For instance, the separation between continuity and non-continuity seemed a bit superfluous. But just the fact that we tried to kind of account for these errors seemed to be appreciated quite a lot. And then there are also different dimensions, for instance, wanting to have linked connections to the original artifacts, but that was not really attainable with the level of granularity in the data we had so far. So the second point that I would like to mention here is one thing that we didn't think about too much in the beginning, also because this is it was a research prototype that came on quite early and grew quite organically after working together. It was not like a top-down research project. Is when would this interface be actually used? How can it be integrated in the actual broader research pipeline? So this is something we're discussing now, because we have seen that it impacted what kind of survey or what kind of dimensions would be used next year. So the campaigns are planned year by year. We saw that they had an impact on the planning for the next year. So can and should it become a kind of a core part of the methodology of these survey archaeologists and become an infrastructure? Which brings me to the last point, I think, that I would like to bring up here is the impact of the process. So even though we started and the data is what drove the visualization design, the actual having seen the visualization went back and influenced the kind of metadata and structure on that the actual archaeological project, so the Sagalassos, our collaborators, wanted to collect and how they collected it. So it's after they saw the potential of what they can do with it, is that they went back and kind of modified their methods. And then the collaborative part that has been going on for 2 years has also impacted both parties quite a lot. And so, for instance, it focused, understanding better the work that the archaeologists do with their data. Also streamlined my PhD more into looking into how to visualize qualitative uncertainty, which is something that I think that is very relevant for the humanities, but is less discussed in practice, or even though theoretically it's very much there. And then on the other side, the archaeologists themselves, even though they have an interface, okay, they used it once, they make research conclusions on that, but we saw that it impacted their broader understanding of what kind of methods can be relevant for their field, not just in this specific one we created. So yes, this is my presentation. I'm very happy to for any questions and topics when it comes to visualizing uncertainty, also interdisciplinarity, because this project by itself is quite interdisciplinary. I'm open to suggestions. Thank you.